When it comes to neurodiversity in the workplace, particularly in the context of recruitment and selection, gamified aptitude tests, ability tests, are a really powerful and very underrated tool to help support this, which is the exact opposite of what people think. Now, when I tell people about the advancements in gamified assessment, often their first thought is, how would this negatively impact neurodiversity? How will neurodivergent candidates struggle with this format? Which is bizarre, because from the outset, I knew the opposite to be very much true. That gamified assessments have significant advantages over and above traditional ability tests, which in turn have huge advantages over things like interviews. So gamified assessments, their real advantage is that we can constrain things in a way that doesn't impact people with certain types of neurodivergence. So for example, dyslexia is in many ways the prime form of neurodivergence. In that maybe 40% of neurodivergent candidates, they're going to be dyslexic. That's going to be the issue. It's extremely common, more common than any other kind. Now, what do we know about dyslexia? Well, it's all about verbal reasoning, specifically reading comprehension. It's about working with words and sentences, and, processing speed and sort of aligned cognitive processes. Gamified assessments, if you ever look at one, what they have in common is they're very, very language free. Often them have basically no words in them whatsoever. Even the verbal ones have tiny portion of the sort of reading comprehension load that a traditional verbal reasoning would have. That matters because we are removing the source of contention from the outset. It's not even about making an adjustment to an existing assessment. We're removing the whole issue, leveling the playing field at its core. You can't do that with something which is static and very sort of word alphanumeric heavy. But there are other things. For example, ADHD, another very common form of neurodivergence. What we know from ADHD is it's very much about attention span and executive functioning. You give someone a 40-minute traditional assessment, which is very dry, they're going to lose interest. They're going to lose focus. They won't be able to provide 100% of their cognitive effort on that task. They won't. But with a game, which is fun and interesting and gives you that dopamine hit and is very quick, 3 to 5 minutes, that is not a huge ask from an executive functioning perspective. You don't need to pay a huge amount of attention. Like, it will be done quickly. They're not going to get ego fatigue and decision fatigue. They're not going to get ego depletion. They're not going to run out of the resources needed to pay attention if the assessment's quick. And there are other forms. In autism, it is very likely kind of neutral. Now, we know from the research that people with autism tend to score slightly higher than the general population on non-verbal reasoning. And even the verbal games are a lot more non-verbal than they would be in the traditional format. So we have some good reason to believe they would score higher than they would otherwise on a traditional assessment. Dyscalculia is another one, in much the same way that dyslexia is advantaged fundamentally with games. I think it's the same thing, because even the numerical games tend to be a lot less numbery. There's a lot less information presented to, because everything's moving. It's moving in and out using game mechanics. That replaces the complexity you would otherwise have by just having lots and lots of numbers. And as a result, across a whole range of neurodivergence, gamified assessments should be significantly better, removing areas of contention so they're just not a concern anymore. It is the ideal way to screen people, and we know that there is very little, basically no differences in cognitive ability, especially when you make adjustments between neurodivergent and neurotypical candidates. Just as valid, just as predictive, just as useful, because obviously you still want good quality of hire. You want to ensure neurodiverse workplace, but you want quality of hire, and this is the fairest, most effective way of doing that. Nothing really compares, and I strongly recommend looking at this approach.